Now, earlier on this morning, we were talking about a report out from Citizens Advice Scotland saying that the number of food parcels that they're distributing, and they, well, not that they're distributing, but they're getting contacted about, has doubled in the last 2 years. They're not the only agency that is involved in this field. We don't actually have numbers on it, but basically the number of food parcels being distributed is increasing radically. And one group that is really showing up there in significant numbers are people who would deemed to be middle class, with a mortgage, leading what would appear to be a very comfortable life from the outside. We're speaking to Ewan Gurr from the Dundee Food Bank earlier on, and he was saying, many of the people that he's now talking to and helping out would have the 48-inch plasma screen, would have the broadband, would have the car. They were living what they saw was a sustainable lifestyle, but a crisis has happened, a change in circumstances, and suddenly they find all these things that they thought were tickling along nicely, they can no longer afford and literally cannot now put food on the table. So we're asking, is this the new poor? Would you regard these people as poor, or do they need to take some responsibility for the lifestyle that they have been leading? Still take calls on that. 0500 92 95 00 is the number to call. Eben Wilson from Taxpayer Scotland says, oh yes, of course you've got to help people out if they have this radical change in circumstances, but they do need to take responsibility for it, and once they've sorted themselves out and they have reorganised their finances, as he said, maybe sell the house or sell the car, then they should be paying back what they've been given. Let's speak to Jonathan Davis, who's an economist and wealth manager. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Kaye.
Good morning. Okay. Good morning. Do you see this as being a bit of an explosion? Is this something that's waiting to erupt? Middle classes who have, whether you would say they have overstretched themselves or whether they have been led into a lifestyle that is now not sustainable, is this about to erupt on us?
I'm afraid to say it is. We're seeing the gradual, as far as I can see, the decimation of the middle classes. They bought into this idea that they could borrow whatever they wanted and pay whatever they wanted for a house because house prices were going to rise forever and always bail them out. Well, it was ridiculous 10 years ago and it's ridiculous now because there's no such thing as something rising forever. And government policies, successive government policies, are exacerbating the trend. I've said it before on your show, the big picture is that while the government and the Bank of England continues to print money, it puts down the value of sterling, which raises the cost of our imports, which means, for example, in the same report that you're quoting from, the cost of food has gone up 30% in the last 3 years. But debts are still at the same huge level and incomes are not rising. Therefore, you've got the middle class and indeed the not particularly well off who are being stretched as never before. This is, over 10 or 20 years, the decimation of the middle class.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have spoken this morning, and you've reiterated there, Jonathan, about government policies and us being led into this situation. But has there also been, a failure of personal responsibility, a failure of the need to save, a loss of thrift as a basic value? And, do people need to face up to that to a certain extent?
Well, for 10 or 15 years until a few years ago, there was, on the face of it, an explosion of every comment you ever heard, whether it was from a politician or a banker or an economist or in the media or an estate agent, was basically the thing you must do is borrow, spend, buy property. All the time, wall-to-wall television, every single night on the TV, buy property, which meant borrow as much as you could because you're not going to fail. So was that a failure of personal responsibility? I would say yes. But was it a failure of responsible politics? Absolutely. And unfortunately, they continue to do the same things. This is the politicians and the policymakers. They do the same things.
Well, they might be doing the same
got us
things.
into the problem in the first place. We're not going to sort the problem until they change their policies.
Well, they might continue to do the same things, Jonathan. I suppose the key question is, as individuals, are we going to continue to do the same things, or are we going to say, no, we're not going to go with that flow anymore? Keith Driver is from Citizen Advice Scotland, and I'm going to have a quick word if I've got time with Sophia and Elizabeth. Morning, Keith.
Good morning.
Good morning. We can go on about who takes responsibility for this. I think it was Katie Grant that said earlier on that future generations will take a very different attitude towards their lifestyles and what is a sustainable lifestyle. I mean, is it too early to see evidence of that? Are people still sort of trying to get out of the bit, or are you seeing sort of changing attitudes?
Well, I think from our experience, it's actually low-income families, people who are, as the government would say, doing the right thing and working, and it's when they reach some sort of crisis point, whether it's unemployment or losing benefits to which they were entitled before, that's actually causing the problem. So I would also say it's government policies that are hurting people, but it's a different kind of policy. It's the welfare reform changes that we're seeing at Citizen Advice Bureau that are actually causing the problem. Things like sickness benefit, the reassessments, limits to the social fund. It's these kind of things that are driving the demand.
Would you see a difference? And we know that these food parcels, and that's just one indicator of people being in need, but we know that they're being distributed across a wide range of people, and I've said that already this morning. But would you see a difference between people who have always struggled for whatever reasons, who've never kind of managed to aspire to a comfortable lifestyle, and the people who have, but now the caca's hitting the fan?
Yeah, well, I suppose we're in a double dip recession, and food prices have gone up, as we already mentioned. So I think there is, people being dragged into this that were increasingly, much more comfortable and wouldn't have seen themselves being in this situation before. So I think there is a sort of a new kind of sort of client that is needing food parcels. Right.
Okay, we've got Sophia on the line. Good morning, Sophia.
Good morning.
Good morning. Where do you put the balance of responsibility here?
Oh, I think, I don't know. My dad always taught me that you kind of had to live within your means, and that involved really not buying things you couldn't actually afford to buy. Mm-hmm. So I think that at the moment a lot of people do overspend, and they do tend to live perhaps not with their means exactly, but just beyond the limits of it. So they've not got much buffer around them when things do go a bit belly up. And, everybody wants everything now, as opposed to kind of saying, well, I can't afford this now. I'll just hang on a bit and I'll get it another time and I'll do without. And I think there is, in reality, what we really need is very much smaller than what we want and what we think we need. And I think sometimes it's hard to recognise the difference because you can just about get the things that you want, but not necessarily need them.
So what's been your personal attitude then? You say your dad always taught you to live within your means. Did you stick to that?
Mostly I have, actually. I mean, for example, when we bought a house, we were living in... both my husband and I are professionals, and we had accommodation provided kind of through work, but it wasn't great. It was just a small room, and we decided we wanted our own place. And what we started off by doing was looking at how much utilities would cost, your bills, your electric and your gas and all that kind of stuff, and worked out therefore how much you're going to be paying a month. And when we realised that when we were looking at places to rent, that you could be spending as much on your rent and your utilities as if you were paying a mortgage, we figured, well, let's see how much you'd be paying on your utilities and your rent, and that we could afford, and that would be how much mortgage we were looking to be spending. So first of all, so that's how we started looking for properties. We started off by working how much we could afford to pay as a mortgage.
I mean, with respect, those are kind of relatively simple and sensible steps that anyone should take. I mean, Jonathan, do you think, although it may be hard for many people, and it is hard for many people, we are going to come out of this wiser about money?
That will be the least of the issues, I'm afraid to say, Kaye. I do apologise. It's your programme. It's called Kaye.
I know.
The UK is the most indebted nation on the planet. Already, as you say, we're seeing more and more people going for food parcels. In the US, give an example, 47 million people are on food stamps, 17% of the population. Anyone who believes that we in the UK are better off than Greece or Spain, believe me, in cloud cuckoo land.
Do you think we've got that coming? Do you think we've got that coming?
Sorry?
Do you think we've got that coming to us?
Many of us did see it coming, absolutely.
No, Jonathan, do you think we've got that coming to us? Do you see us,
Of course.
seeing what we're seeing in Greece?
Of course we do. We're the most indebted nation on the planet. The middle class in particular, their assets are in their house, or indeed houses, or in their pensions. Both of those are being decimated. Their debts are not being decimated. Their income is not rising. Thus, yes, we are seeing it coming. What we're going back to, I'm afraid to say, people need to get to grips with this, is we're going back to the 1950s when you had the rich, the poor and the sub-poor. There will not be a middle class. And those who have got debts up to here, they need to do something about it urgently.
Jonathan, listen, thank you. We've run out of time. On that cheery note, we must leave you. I've got 3 words for you, Fred. Beans on toast.